Good morning and happy bank holiday. Is it morning? Yes, it is. Oh no, hang on, that clock's out. Either way, welcome to Family Law Assistance. Isn't it something when you've just kind of relaxed over a bank holiday and then you start getting your head back in the game and you suddenly realise you don't know what day it is. You're not even quite sure what time it is. That's kind of where I'm at this morning. So, guys, welcome back to Family Law Assistance. Today, you may have noticed that we've been talking a little bit about grandparents, and so I thought I'd jump on a live. I did promise it yesterday, so if you guys weren't seeing my comments, you'd have seen that I was talking all about grandparents yesterday. And in fact, we have a blog all about grandparents. So I've put that in the comments yesterday, I think. So let's talk about it, okay? Because grandparents are so important. When a couple separate, actually, it's the grandparents that often try and step in and often try and mediate. So things sometimes don't always go to plan, you know. The grandparents in particular, those that are trying to mediate, often they'll find that, you know, either the negotiations come to naught, or actually they can be pretty instrumental in building the bridge between mum and dad. Now, families are messy, right? So the reality of the situation is grandparents, you get stuck in the middle and you kind of get a bit left out. Because what often happens I'm going to talk about a typical or general scenario. I fully admit that I'm broad stroking here, but what can happen is that mum and dad separate. You've tried your best to intervene to try and bridge that gap, and it's not paid off. So often, not always, but often the resident parent tends to be the mum, and often, again, not always, okay, there's always the caveat. Maybe if I just say there's always a caveat, okay, and just carry on with this. But often it'll be the mum that will perhaps prevent, for whatever reason, will be preventing contact between children and dad. So dad makes an application, or he may try mediation. He should try mediation beforehand. That's not come to anything. Dad issues an application to the court asking for the court's help. Okay, and often grandparents are in the back supporting dad who's making the application. Here's the thing. At the end of that application, it may very well be that either dad has got contact with the children, or it might be found that it's not as much contact, or certainly not enough contact, so that grandparents, that you have that relationship with your grandchildren as well. Okay? And generally, grandparents kind of feel a bit left out. Now, listen, we've been in this game for about 14 years now. So when it comes to talking about grandparents, it's one of the grandparents, you are the people that really keep things together. But often you're the voice that gets left out. So today we are talking about this for you, because believe it or not, 14 years ago, one of the first people I assisted actually was a grandparent. And, you know, the scenario that I talked about was a little different. So in this particular case, this grandmother, there was social services involvement. And actually, all right, so this is kind of like a public law case, but it may speak to you guys. So there was a lot of social services involvement. The children at this point, there were two of them, two young children. These two children were about to be put into care. This was the time, it was quite a crucial time. So there was a court case, there was mum, there was dad. I mean, there was a whole orchestra of people, cast of people in the courtroom, except one pair of people, and that was the grandparents. Now, one of the things that grandparents didn't do was step forward and offer themselves to care for these children. So the professionals had thought that the children weren't safe, again, for whatever reason. I'm not going to go too much into detail about it, but for whatever reason, the professionals, the social workers, the court, the professionals, the guardians, I mean, the whole cast of people felt that the children were not safe in mother's care and they weren't as safe in father's care. So they were at that crossroads that they were about to be put into care. Now, the grandparents didn't know that they could step forward and actually be the person to step into those shoes and offer to care. Basically because they hadn't sought legal advice, basically because they just assumed that they were just not they're not mum and dad, and so therefore they shouldn't have their say. But they were wrong. They were wrong. So they came to me, and we're talking years ago here, they came to me and I said, you should be putting yourself forward. So we did. We put themselves forward. And now, this is the lovely part of the story. Had they not have got over that, oh, well, who are we? And got in touch, they wouldn't have the relationship they have with their grandchildren they have now. Now, I get, listen, that families are complicated, and especially when there's social services involvement, it gets messy. I totally get it gets messy. But you know what? I think the voice of the grandparent, they're often the forgotten party. They're often the people that tend to be left out, but actually play such a huge role. So let's now talk about your rights. Well, this is a myth, and people who know me will know me. I'm going to do a little bit of myth busting here because grandparents, you have no rights. There, I've said it. But actually, neither do fathers and neither do mothers. This is huge myth busting because often there are groups out there on Facebook and people who campaign for rights of grandparents or rights of fathers, okay? The reality is, and in law, and hey, that's what we're talking about here, there are no such legal things as grandparents' rights, fathers' rights, mother's rights, because you don't get the Grandparents Act 19 whatever, you don't get the Fathers Act 19 whatever, and you certainly don't get the Mothers Act 19 whatever. What you do have is something called the Children Act 1989. And that, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, that is what the court is going to use to determine how and what kind of a relationship a child should have with their family. Grandparents particularly have such an important role to play in a children's life. So actually, it's not the grandparent having a relationship with the child, it's the other way around. And language and semantics really are important when you're in a court application. So you'll often hear me being quite anal about making sure that the language is right, okay? And the reason I do that is so that people, especially when they're in a court application, particularly when they're about to embark on court or going through that court process, having that right mindset has a huge impact on the result. So you'll often hear me talk about the children's relationship with mum, dad, grandparents. So you don't have any rights, but your grandchildren do. You as grandparents are hugely responsible for a child's roots, heritage, upbringing, who they are, their sense of identity. But because you don't have something called the magic parental responsibility, you don't have an automatic right to apply or ask the court for contact with your grandchildren, okay? Grandparents, you've got an additional hoop to jump through, and that additional hoop is an extra form. Now, if any of you have been aware of courts, you'll know one thing as a dead cert: you can't have too many forms. And this is exactly what we're talking about. Now, mum, dad, people with parental responsibility, they automatically, and by the way, did you know, fun fact, did you know that up to 6 people can have parental responsibility for a child? I know, crazy, right? I mean, I find it difficult enough, especially, well, people find it difficult enough with only 2 people having parental responsibility, but it's true, up to 6 people can have PR. So for you grandparents, you can't automatically rock up to court with your form, your C100 form, and go, I want to have contact with the grandchildren, because you don't have PR. So all that means for you is you have to do an additional form. We all know, you know what, the courts cannot have enough forms. It's a dead certain court. If you know, you know. So you're filling out an additional form, and you'll be asking then for exactly what a mother or a father would ask for. So a couple of tips that I have. First of all, know what you want. People, and I say this actually in the round because people often know what they don't want, but rarely do people know what they do want. So know what you want, get the calendar out. What's realistic? Bearing in mind that your grandchildren have a right to have the heritage, sense of identity, root, who they are. And often who they are relies on you, grandparents. Now, and it's kind of our bad, really, because we get so caught up in the day-to-day that we've really started now to take time out for grandparents to have their voices heard, because they are so important, and they play a significant and important role. And sometimes grandparents are the missing link. Grandparents are the people that have bridged that gap, or they've tried to bridge that gap between mum and dad. And sometimes, in worst case scenarios, they tend to be the last resort as well, although they don't know it. You guys, you don't often know it, okay? So first of all, realise your importance, okay? Your importance in that child's life is huge. And by the way, I think I did a post, I don't know if it was here, but I certainly did a post somewhere else. And, you know, I remember my grandmother. My grandmother was, well, she was like me, honestly. She had crazy wacky hair. It was bright, I think it was bright red. Bright red hair. She was full of character. She was kind of out there. She liked a good time. Like me. But I remember certainly from hey, this is why, I guess it's why I do, but one of the reasons that I'm so passionate about it, I mean, my nan, I loved my nan with all my heart, but I remember at the time, family environment, family dynamics meant that I wasn't able to have a full relationship with my grandmother. And I know that from my point of view, I kind of, especially come the end, I remember, and she passed away when I was sort of teens, but I remember at that point, actually I was quite impressionable, and I really needed to know my sense of identity, and to know really who I was, where I come from. Now I'm in that position, so just a personal note, now as a child of not having that relationship, I'm in that position where I want to sort of go back retrospectively and find out bits and pieces about who I am. So grandparents, you are hugely important, and I think it's certainly important for me that I make sure that grandparents, you have children in your life, the grandchildren have that relationship with you, because without you, potentially you've got a child there that doesn't know where they come from. They're missing out on their roots and their heritage. So it's super important. Now, I'm not saying, by the way, I'm not saying actually that court applications are just the way to go. You know, often what usually happens in a parental conflict is that dad often, not always, dad often tends to be the non-resident parent. So grandparents tend to sort of sandwich their time when they can, when say dad is having conflict. He probably has that too, but when dad is having time with the children. But often that's not the case. Sometimes the times, that's not always possible. It's not always possible to have children's time with grandparents sandwiched in like that. It's sometimes just not all possible. Or sometimes that the relationship between mum and dad have broken down so significantly that grandparents, you're not able to kind of sandwich, I couldn't think of a better word, sandwich your time in with dad. If this is you, okay, and this is resonating with you, and you're kind of thinking, yeah, that's me, then get in touch. You know, court should always be the last resort. It absolutely should be, okay? All of family law assistance has built their ethos on conciliation. We are not about to pour petrol on the flames. If you do need help from the court, then we're here. So guys, if this is you and you're resonating with this right now, okay, holler, get in touch. more than happy to help. Guys, have an amazing rest of your bank holiday. I don't know what you've got planned. I'm going to be making most of the great weather outside, which is rare. I mean, it's Wales, you know, I mean, we don't often get great weather. So when we do get it, we are definitely making the most of it. So guys, I hope you have an amazing rest of your bank holiday. Check you later. Mwah.